The lake had no name on any map they gave her. That was the first thing Mara noticed when the drop pod cracked open and the cold air of the Vareth preserve hit her face like a fist wrapped in pine needles. She stood at the edge of the trailhead for a moment, breathing it in, letting her eyes adjust to the strange amber quality of the light. The sun here, if you could call it that, sat lower in the sky than any sun she'd grown up under, and it cast everything in a bruised gold that made the trees look like they were on fire but hadn't told anyone yet. The lake was maybe 200 meters ahead through the tree line, perfectly still, obsidian dark despite the light, reflecting nothing. Mara pulled the straps of her survival pack tighter and checked the small device clipped to her left forearm. Green light. Oxygen nominal. Atmospheric pressure nominal. Gravity at 0.94 standard. Good enough. She had run in worse. She had survived in worse. That was, after all, why they sent her. The Compact Liaison Service didn't send heroes to Vareth. Heroes were for the front lines, for the ships burning in orbit around Calith 9. For the fortress moons and the screaming headlines and the recruitment posters that plastered every station hab in the 7 systems. Heroes got statues. Heroes got ceremonies. Heroes got sent home in whatever pieces the evacuation teams could find. They sent people like Mara to Vareth. She started running. The trail was wide enough for 2 abreast. Packed earth with a faint silver-gray tinge from the mineral content of the soil, and it curved gently along the lake's edge in a near-perfect oval. The Vareth used this place. She'd read the briefing 3 times on the approach, had practically memorized it the way she memorized everything that might keep her breathing, and the one thing that stood out from all the biology notes and political context and cultural warnings was this. The preserve was sacred to them, not religious sacred, not the kind of sacred you could respectfully acknowledge and then quietly ignore, the kind of sacred that made the Vareth stop talking when you mentioned it. The kind that turned their feather crests flat and their compound eyes to a color that had no human equivalent. The kind of sacred that made them willing to sit down at a negotiation table and listen, for the first time in 11 months, if the Compact agreed to send 1 human, unarmed, to run the trail at the preserve before any talks could begin. Nobody had explained to Mara why running mattered. The briefing didn't cover it. Her handler, a tired-looking man named Osi who smelled permanently of recycled air and old coffee, had shrugged when she asked. Cultural, he'd said. They want to see it. Just run the trail, don't stop. Complete the loop and come back to the pod and we'll start talks within the hour. He'd paused. Probably. Mara had asked if anyone had done this before. Osi had looked at her in a way that told her everything she needed to know without saying a word. She ran. The trail was 3 kilometers around the lake. She knew this from the briefing. She'd run 3 kilometers in her sleep, in her dreams, in the middle of firefights when retreat was the only option with any math behind it. She had legs that had carried her across the ash flats of Morrow Station and up the exterior maintenance ladders of a burning troop transport and through 6 kilometers of flooded access tunnels on the Keth Orbital with a broken rib and a dislocated shoulder and a Vareth Hunter team less than 40 seconds behind her. 3 kilometers around a quiet lake on a cool morning was, by any reasonable measure, nothing. She told herself that. She believed it, mostly. She was 200 meters into her first loop when she realized the hooded figure hadn't moved. It was standing at the far edge of the trail where the tree line thickened, maybe 50 meters ahead, perfectly still. Tall. The proportions were wrong for a human, too long in the torso, too narrow in the shoulder, legs that bent slightly backward at the knee in the way that always read wrong to her hindbrain, no matter how many years she'd spent working. Alongside Vareth, the hood was deep brown, rough fabric, and it swallowed whatever features might have been underneath. Mara kept running. She didn't slow down, she didn't speed up. She kept her eyes forward, her breathing steady, her face neutral, because she was being watched. And she knew it, and the one thing you never did when you were being watched by the Vareth was show them your teeth, metaphorically or otherwise. She passed within 10 meters of the figure. It didn't move, it didn't react. If it had eyes beneath that hood, and it almost certainly did, the Vareth had 5 of them, arranged in a shallow arc. They gave nothing away. She completed the first loop. The trailhead looked different. She stopped, barely, just a half-second pause, and then kept moving because stopping completely would mean something, and she didn't know what it would mean, but she knew it wouldn't be good. The pod was where she'd left it. The crack in the earth where it had impacted was fresh and obvious, dark soil overturned, the silver nose of the pod still warm. All of that was right. But the light was different. The amber quality had deepened, like the sun had moved without her noticing, not significantly, not dramatically, but enough. The shadows leaned at a slightly different angle. She checked her forearm device. The clock read 14 minutes and 8 seconds since she'd started her run. That was wrong. 3 kilometers in 14 minutes was a pace she hadn't run since her academy days, when she'd been younger and angrier and hadn't yet learned that anger spent on a track was anger wasted. She ran a comfortable 5:30 per kilometer pace when she ran for function rather than sport. 3 kilometers should have taken her 16, maybe 17 minutes. She checked the clock again. Still 14 minutes. She started her second loop. The hooded figure was gone, or it had moved. She wasn't sure which. She was past the spot where it had been standing by the time the absence registered. And she didn't look back, because looking back was the kind of thing you did when you weren't sure you were being measured. And she was completely sure she was being measured. She just noted it the way she noted everything. Filed it, tagged it, moved on. The lake was still. Too still. She had run beside bodies of water her whole career. Not many, because there weren't many where the compact sent people like her, but enough to know that water moved, wind moved it, birds moved it, insects touched it, fish broke the surface. This lake had none of that. It lay like a sheet of black glass, and when she looked at it directly, she couldn't see the bottom or the far bank or anything except the inverted image of the strange amber sky. She was running past the thickest part of the tree line, halfway around the lake's far end, when she heard the footsteps behind her, matching her pace exactly. Mara did not stop. She did not look back. She adjusted her breathing, 3 counts in, 3 counts out, and performed the small internal inventory that 11 years of fieldwork had made. Automatic. No weapon, no comm, no backup. 1 human. 3 kilometers of trail around a black lake on an alien world whose rulers had agreed to stop killing her people if she ran this loop correctly, whatever correctly meant. Footsteps, still matching, gaining slightly. She went through her options. Running faster was possible, but she didn't know what it would communicate. Stopping was a statement she couldn't afford to make. Turning around, looking back, that felt like the worst of all of them, the most loaded, the gesture most likely to mean something terrible in a language she couldn't fully read. She ran. The footsteps fell away, or fell behind. She couldn't tell which. She completed the second loop. The pod was gone. She stopped, fully stopped. Stood at the trailhead and stared at the empty impact crater. The dark soil still disturbed, still fresh, in the absence where a 400-kilogram survival pod had been 30 minutes ago. She stared at it for 3 full seconds, which was, in her professional estimation, about 2.5 seconds longer than she could afford. And then she started running again, because the trail was all she had, and she had not survived 11 years of close contact liaison work by standing still in the places where her exits used to be. The hooded figure was behind her, not at the tree line, not in the distance, behind her on the trail, maybe 30 meters back. She could hear it now, not footsteps exactly, something quieter. The faint disturb of displaced air, the almost not there sound of something moving through space that didn't want to make noise but wasn't entirely succeeding. It was following her, had been following her maybe since the beginning, and it was gaining. She ran faster. The trail curved and she went with it. Around the bend where the tree line pressed closest to the lake edge and the path narrowed to barely a shoulder's width. She was moving at a pace she recognized from bad situations. The kind of pace where your lungs start to file complaints and your body begins negotiating with your brain about what parts of the plan can be reconsidered. Her boots hit the packed earth in a rhythm that was almost right, almost the rhythm she wanted, and she held it by force of will because the alternative was to lose the only thing she currently had going for her, which was motion. She came around the bend and found herself standing right there on the trail 20 meters ahead. Same boots, same pack, same forearm device, same hair pulled back the same way she pulled it because she'd had the same hairstyle since she was 19 and had never seen a reason to change it. Same face, same posture. The other her was standing still, looking at the trail ahead rather than behind. And for one long fraction of a second, neither of them moved. Then the other Mara looked up and met her eyes. And what she saw in that face was not panic. It was not confusion. It was the specific and very controlled expression of someone who had been in this situation long enough to understand it and had not yet decided whether that understanding was a gift or a curse. Third loop, the other one said. Mara was still running. She slowed, not quite stopped, a few meters away. What? Are you on your third loop or your second? Second. The other Mara nodded, looked at her forearm device. I'm on my 5th. Come on. Walk with me while you tell me what you know, and I'll tell you what I've figured out. We need to share information before. She paused, tilted her head slightly, listening. Before it gets complicated. Before what gets complicated? The other Mara looked at the trail behind them both, and her expression did something that Mara's own face very rarely did. It showed fear, not the big theatrical kind, The small, controlled, working kind, the kind that it's I know it's coming and I'm managing it, but I want you to understand the stakes. There are more of us, she said, and some of them have been here a long time. Mara had a handful of rules she'd assembled over 11 years, little pieces of hard-won operational wisdom that she carried the way other people carried keys or lucky charms. Don't trust the first map you're given. Don't underestimate a Varath hunter team regardless of their stated disposition. Don't let anyone see you calculate the odds. Don't let anyone see you running out of options. And, when your situation changes in a way you don't understand, treat it like a problem you can solve, because despair accomplishes nothing, and the universe is full of problems people said were impossible right up until someone solved them. She started applying that rule now. The two of them walked the second half of Mara's second loop side by side, the other Mara talking steadily and Mara listening. The other one, she started thinking of her as 5, for the number of loops she'd completed, laid it out with the same flat, methodical clarity that Mara would have used in her position, which was sensible, since they were the same person. Every time she completed a loop of the trail, a new version of herself appeared at the trailhead, running, starting over, unaware of what she was running into. This had been happening by 5's count since at least her third loop. There had been another one, call her 2, who had been a full loop ahead of 5 when 5 first saw her. 2 had been panicking when 5 found her, not visibly, not externally, but in the small tells that Mara knew on herself, the way she knew her own heartbeat. The slightly too controlled breathing, the fingers moving in the pattern that meant she was counting exits. 2 had calmed down when 5 explained what she'd worked out. They had run together for a while, helping each other, pooling what little they knew. Where is she now? Mara asked. 5 was quiet for a moment. She went ahead, toward the far end of the lake, to see if there was a way out. And she didn't come back. Mara absorbed that, kept walking. The hooded figure, what is it? Varath, one of them, or something they made. I don't know if it's an observer or a participant or something else entirely. I've tried approaching it twice, it moves away, it doesn't attack. But 5 stopped walking for just a moment the first time her stride had broken, and then resumed. The second time I approached it, there was another one. Same hood, same proportions, standing further back. When I moved toward the second one, a third appeared. I stopped moving toward them. Smart. I thought so. The ones that have been here longer don't think so. The ones that have been here longest. Another pause, and this one was longer. They approached the figures, not to negotiate, not to understand. They've given up on understanding. The lake came into view around the bend, always the same bend, always the same angle, always the same still black water, and Mara stopped walking. How many of us are there? That I've seen? 7. That I know are here and maybe haven't seen. More. I found a campsite. 5 said it the way you said things you didn't want to say carefully, with no inflection, as if removing the emotion from the words made the content less real. At the far end of the lake, in the trees, someone had been there for a long time, built a shelter out of fallen branches, made a fire pit, had been making marks on the trees, tally marks. I stopped counting at 47. Tally marks for what? Loops? I don't know. Days maybe, if time moves normally, which I don't think it does. 5 looked at her steadily. There was a body in the shelter, long dead. I couldn't tell which one of us she was, by which I mean I couldn't tell how far along she'd been. But she was in the uniform, same boots. Mara stood there for a moment. The amber light pressed down on everything. The lake didn't move. Somewhere in the trees, something that might have been a bird and might have been something else made a single low note and then went quiet. The Varath did this, Mara said. It wasn't a question. The Preserve does this, 5 said. Whether the Varath intended it, whether this is what they wanted when they asked for a human runner, I don't know. It might be what the Preserve does to anything that completes a loop. It might be specific to humans. It might be a test with a solution we haven't found yet. She paused. It might be exactly what it looks like. Which is what to you? 5 met her eyes. Same eyes. A trap. Mara thought about Osi and his tired face and his shrug. She thought about the briefing she'd memorized and the things it hadn't told her. She thought about the negotiations that were supposed to begin after she completed the loop, and the 11 months of war, and the casualty reports she'd read the way she read everything, carefully, cataloging, and the faces in those reports that weren't faces anymore, just names. I'm going to keep running, she said. 5 stared at her. I know. So did I. So does everyone. No. Mara pulled the straps of her pack tighter, a habit, a preparation. I'm going to keep running toward something, not away from it, toward the hooded figures, toward whatever is at the center of this. I'm going to run like I'm supposed to run, and I'm going to run it correctly, and I'm going to figure out what correctly means. She checked her forearm device. The clock had reset. The Verith wanted me to run this trail. They called it sacred. They asked for a specific thing, one human running the loop. There's a reason they asked for that. There's always a reason. I'm going to find it. Five was quiet for a long moment. Then what if the reason is that it doesn't end? What if the reason is that you just run forever and they watch? Then I run forever and they watch, Mara said. But I'll be running with my eyes open. She started running again. Five ran beside her for a while and then fell back and then was gone. And Mara completed her second loop alone. The third loop began with a version of herself standing at the trailhead crying. Not theatrically, not loudly. Standing with her back very straight and her hands at her sides, the way you stood when you were trying to hold something together, and crying in the small, involuntary way that happened when the body stopped waiting for permission. This one, she would have been early. Maybe second or third loop, had clearly just found the pod missing and was processing it in real time. Mara slowed. Hey. The other one looked up. Her face did the complicated thing of recognizing itself, which was always a small violence, no matter how many times it happened. What is this? I know what it is. Or I know parts of it. Walk with me and I'll tell you. Mara reached out, hesitated, and then did the thing she would have wanted someone to do for her, which was place a hand briefly on the other woman's shoulder, contact and then release, not dragging it out. Come on, keep moving. Standing still costs you more than running. The other one wiped her face with the back of her hand in a single precise motion and started moving. How many loops are you on? Starting my third. I just finished my second. Good, you're right behind me. Stay with me. They ran side by side. The early version, call her 2 this time, since 5's numbering had fallen off, asked questions rapid fire. The questions Mara would have asked in her position, and Mara answered them in order. Yes, there are more of us. Yes, I've spoken to one. No, I haven't found a way out yet. Yes, I'm trying to find one. No, I don't know if the Verith can see what's happening or if they're responsible for it. Yes, the figures are Verith-shaped. No, I don't think approaching them aggressively is useful. No, I don't know what the tally marks mean. Yes, there is a dead one. Keep running. 2 was quiet for a while after that. Then, you're not scared. I'm terrified, Mara said. I'm just doing it at a pace I can maintain. 2 made a sound that, on a different day in a different place, would have been a laugh. They completed the third loop. The trail was more populated now. She could feel it the way you felt a crowd. Not a specific sight or sound, but a quality of the space, a sense of occupation. There were other versions of herself somewhere on the trail ahead and behind, and the knowledge was strange in a way that she wasn't going to resolve through analysis. So she put it on the same shelf where she stored everything she couldn't currently afford to think about and kept moving. The hooded figures had multiplied. She counted 3 of them now, spaced out around the lake's far perimeter, standing at the trail's edge in their characteristic absolute stillness. She looked at them directly as she passed. She had decided somewhere in the second loop's second half to look at them, not to flinch from them, not to pretend they weren't there. The briefing had said the Verith observed human body language with precision. Their 5 eyes processed depth and motion in a spectrum wider than human vision, and she thought that flinching away from the observers, from the things you were supposed to be presenting yourself to, was probably the wrong read of the situation. So she looked at them, not aggressively, not submissively. The way you looked at something you were acknowledging without fear, the way you looked at another professional across a room. The middle figure's hood moved, just slightly, a fractional turn, tracking her as she passed. It was the first response she'd gotten from any of them. She filed it and kept running. The campsite was where 5 had described it, far end of the lake, trees thicker on the left side where a small natural depression created a windbreak. Fallen branches dragged and stacked against a boulder to form 3 walls of something between a lean-to and a shelter. The fire pit was cold. The tally marks were in the tree bark, cut deep with what must have been either a stone or the edge of a boot buckle, and she stopped long enough to count properly this time, 112 marks. Then a gap. Then 11 more, these ones less precise. The cuts shallower, the lines less even. 123 days, maybe. Or 123 loops. Or 123 somethings that a version of herself had decided were worth counting. She didn't look at what was in the shelter. She already knew, and knowing once was enough. She found 2 again near the lake's near end, and she found 5 near the trail's start, and there were 2 others she hadn't spoken to yet. One who was running very fast and not responding to her voice, just staring at the ground and moving, and one who was sitting on a rock at the lake's edge and staring at the water with an expression that Mara recognized as the specific exhaustion of someone who had been fighting a losing battle for long enough to understand that it was losing. She sat down next to the sitting one. The other Mara looked at her. Her uniform was dirtier than it should have been, scuffed at the knees, a small tear at the left shoulder. She had been here longer, several loops at least, maybe more. Her eyes were clear but very tired. Found the campsite? The sitting one said. Yes, she died because she stopped moving. Not a question. Just a verdict, delivered flatly, maybe. I don't know. The sitting one turned back to the water. I've been trying to understand the lake, she said. I've been watching it for. She checked her forearm device, which showed a clock that had clearly reset several times. A while. I think it's a reflective surface for something. Not water. Not just water. The figures, the Vareth ones, when you look at the lake from the right angle, you can see them in the reflection even when they're behind you. Even when they should be out of your line of sight. I think the lake is how they observe us. I think they can see every version of us simultaneously from the lake. Every one of us on the loop, all at once. Mara looked at the water. She had been looking at it without looking at it, processing it as an obstacle to be noted, a feature of the terrain, background context. She looked at it properly now. The lake was still in the way that only happened in the absence of any life at all, the way water got on airless moons or in sealed tanks, and in it, like a photograph of a depth that shouldn't exist, she saw the trail. She saw the loop. She saw, very faint, at the edge of perception, movement. Several moving figures, all the same, all running. Seen from above, as if through the eye of something looking down. They're watching the pattern, she said. Not to sitting Mara, to herself. That's what I thought, said the sitting one. They're not watching us as individuals. They're watching the shape we make. All of us together. The loops and the repetitions and the... She stopped. I can't figure out what they're looking for in the shape. I can't figure out what it's supposed to look like when it's right. Mara stood up. I might be able to. The sitting one looked up at her. Stay here, Mara said. Keep watching the lake. I need to know if the pattern in the reflection changes. I'll come back. You'll just be you again. Another you. You'll have no memory of asking me this. I know, but you'll have memory of me asking. So when the next one comes around and wants to know why you're watching the water, tell her. Tell all of them. We need someone watching the reflection. She paused. We need to coordinate, and we can't do it through shared memory. We have to do it through. She almost smiled, which surprised her. Communication. The old-fashioned kind. She ran. The fourth loop was where it changed. She was at the far end of the lake near the campsite when she saw the fast-running version of herself coming from the opposite direction. They had started at different points in the loop and were now meeting in the middle, like two hands of a clock catching up to each other. This one was still in the panicked running state, ground down, not engaging, not responding to being called. Mara stopped directly in front of her. The fast runner stopped too, or her body did, with the sudden physical jolt of someone whose forward motion has been interrupted by an immovable obstacle. She looked up, looked at Mara's face. The recognition was still strange, still a small shock, but Mara had practiced for it by now, and she kept her expression neutral and open. I know you're scared, she said. I know it feels like running is all you have, but I need you to look at something with me. The fast one was breathing hard. Her eyes were too wide. I just need to get through the loop. I just need to complete it. If I complete it, you'll start another one. I know, I've done it. Mara stepped to the side, not blocking but offering. Come with me for 10 minutes. Look at the lake, look at the figures. Tell me what you see. It took another moment. Then the fast one nodded, a tight, controlled nod, and they walked together to the water's edge. The lake reflected 5 separate running figures in its surface. Mara counted them and held the count in her mind. 5. 5 versions of her, all on the loop simultaneously, all visible from above in the lake's eye. 5 small human shapes running around a black oval, seen from the perspective of whatever was watching. What does it look like from up there? Mara said, mostly to herself. A race, the fast one offered. A ritual, Mara said. The Vareth use ritual motion in negotiation contexts. It's in the briefing, not just words, movements, patterns. The body showing the mind's position. She watched the small figures in the reflection, the tiny repeated loops, the same shape traced over and over. We've been running the loop as if we're trying to escape it, as if the goal is to get out. She paused. What if the goal is the opposite? What if we're supposed to be seen running it? All of us together in a particular way. The fast one stared at the reflection for a long time. We're showing them something. Yes, we're showing them humans. What humans do when they're trapped. What they do when they're scared. What they do when they find themselves running in circles. And what do they do? Keep running, Mara said. Keep talking to each other. Don't give up. Help the next version that comes through. Make marks on trees so the ones who come later know how long it's been. She looked at the fast one. We keep going. We adapt. We find each other. We're stubbornly, ridiculously, infuriatingly alive. The fast one was quiet. The lake's reflection shifted slightly. A ripple without a cause, a tremor in the glass, and the 5 small figures in its surface changed shape, the pattern of their loops rearranging. Something changed. The fast one said, "I know." The 5th loop was different in ways she could feel before she could name. The amber light had shifted again, warmer now, almost orange, the kind of late-day color that made the trees look like they were genuinely burning this time. The hooded figures had moved, not disappeared, moved, taken new positions along the trail, clustering now near the trailhead rather than at the lake's far end, and when she ran past the first of them, she looked it directly in the face. Underneath the hood, the arrangement of 5 compound eyes in their shallow arc, all of them oriented toward her, processing her with whatever lay behind insect facets and alien cognition, and she nodded. Not in submission, not in challenge. The nod you gave to someone you were meeting under difficult circumstances and were choosing to meet without weapons. The figure's crest, visible beneath the hood's edge, a narrow ridge of iridescent filaments that the Vareth used for emotional expression, shifted. Color, just briefly, just a flicker, from the neutral gray of careful observation to something at the edge of the violet range that Mara had read in the briefing and had memorized because she memorized everything. Curiosity, not surprise, not alarm, curiosity. She ran on. She found 5 again near the lake's midpoint, and 200 meters behind that, and the sitting one was still at the water's edge, watching the reflection, and she had found a 6th version, one who had been quiet and methodical and was now keeping pace with the sitting one, adding her observations to the pile. They were building something. Not an escape plan, not yet, maybe not ever, but a structure of shared knowledge. A web of information passed hand to hand around the loop because none of them retained it between loops themselves, but all of them could carry it. Forward for the next one who came through. Mara ran through them like a relay runner, taking a baton that none of them had, collecting observations, redistributing them. The figure that had showed curiosity. She thought of it now as the observer, the one that had been there since the beginning, the one that was watching most closely, had moved closer to the trail. Not close enough to touch, not close enough to threaten, but closer, 3 meters instead of 10. Close enough that when she ran past it, she could hear, very faintly, the sound it made when it breathed. A low harmonic that wasn't quite in the range of human hearing but wasn't quite outside it either, the edge of a frequency that bypassed the ears and arrived somewhere behind the sternum. She recognized that sound. She had heard it once before, in a Vareth council room on a station at the edge of compact space, before things had gotten bad. Before 11 months of bodies and burning ships. The sound the Vareth made when they were deliberating, when they were weighing something. She was being weighed. They were all being weighed. The shape of their running, the pattern of their motion, the thing they made when you added up all the loops, all the versions, all the ways a human responded when she found herself trapped in a circle with no exit and no memory and no map. The question was, weighed against what? What was the scale? What was being measured? She ran the 5th loop faster, not fleeing, toward. The 6th loop was where the hooded figures stepped onto the trail. She came around the bend near the campsite. She didn't look at the campsite. Anymore, it was data she'd absorbed and filed, and the observer was standing in the middle of the trail, directly in the middle, not at the edge, not in the trees, in the path. Mara slowed, stopped 4 meters back. The observer stood absolutely still. This close, she could see more of it. The proportions of the body beneath the rough fabric, the angle of the backward knee, the length of the fingers that hung at its sides, 7 fingers on each hand, not unusual for Vareth. The compound eyes beneath the hood shadow, all 5 fully open, fully oriented. Neither of them moved for a long moment. Then the observer raised one hand slowly, palm outward, a gesture so universal in primate and near-primate species that linguists had written entire papers about why something so specific to one evolutionary branch kept recurring across convergent species, and Mara raised her own hand in return. It held the gesture for 3 seconds. Then it lowered its hand and stepped off the trail. She ran through the space where it had been. The loop ended and the 7th began, and Mara ran it with her eyes wide and her mind turning over everything the sitting one had told her about the lake's reflection, everything the others had passed along the relay, everything she'd observed herself. She was building a picture of it, the whole architecture of what was happening, the loop, the multiplication, the observation, the figures, the waiting, and the picture kept refusing to resolve into something simple, not a trap, not just a trap. A trap could be solved by escape, and she'd stopped thinking about escape around the 4th loop. A test, maybe. The Vareth tested their own young in ritual landscapes. She had read this. It was in the briefing. Cultural Note 7C. Easily overlooked because it had seemed abstract. Ritual landscapes where the young Vareth ran trials until they demonstrated something. Not skill, not strength. Something more specific, something harder to name. What did the Verith value above physical capability? She was halfway around the seventh loop when it came to her. She stopped running. She stood at the lake's edge and looked into the water and saw the reflection and counted the figures in it. 7. 7 versions of herself running the loop simultaneously. The pattern they made together from above, complex and crowded, 7 small human shapes moving through a trail around a black oval, seen by whatever watched from the lake's strange depth. 7. And she was one of them. And she had information that had been passed to her, added to, built by every version that had come before. She was carrying more than any individual one of them had started with. She was, in a very literal sense, more than the sum of her earlier selves, not because she was smarter or stronger or more capable, but because she had stopped running alone. Cooperation. Not the military kind, not the chain of command kind, but the horizontal kind. The kind where you kept showing up with what you knew and gave it to whoever needed it, not because you'd been ordered to, but because it was the obvious right thing to do. She looked at the 7 figures in the lake's reflection and thought, that's what they're watching for. That's the shape they want to see. Not one runner completing the loop, all of them working. She started running again. Faster now, she had somewhere to be. She found the sitting one and told her what she'd understood. The sitting one had already reached a version of it herself. She was good. All of them were good. She had always been good, and it was strange and clarifying to see her own capability reflected back at her without ego getting in the way. They compared notes, refined the picture, added what the sitting one had observed about the reflection, the way it shifted when more versions started coordinating, the way the ripple without cause happened when the pattern changed. If we're all running together, the sitting one said, not just passing information, actually together. Same pace, same position. What does that look like from above? Mara looked at the lake, thought about it. One runner, she said. To something looking from above, it would look like one runner. They stared at each other. One runner completing the loop, the sitting one said slowly. One human. That's what they asked for. That's what they asked for. The sitting one stood up. We have to find all of them. It took 4 more loops. 4 more circuits of the lake, finding each version, passing the idea, convincing, persuading, and occasionally just standing in the path the way the observer had stood in hers, until the version she was talking to slowed down enough to listen. The fast runner was hardest. The fast runner didn't want to stop, didn't want to believe there was anything worth slowing down for, had committed completely to the logic of perpetual motion. Mara stood in front of her a second time and said, I know, I understand. But what if running correctly means running together? The fast one searched her face for something, evidence maybe, proof. How do you know it works? I don't, Mara said. I know that everything I've tried so far has moved the figures closer and changed the color of the observer's crest. I know that the lake's reflection changes when we coordinate. I know that the Verith asked for one human to run this trail, and one human running this trail has produced a dozen iterations and no resolution. So either they wanted us plural, they wanted to see this specific thing play out, or there's something we're still missing, and the most likely missing thing is that we're supposed to be the one they asked for. Together. The fast runner looked at her for a long, long moment. Then she said, which way? They moved around the loop in sequence, finding each version, each time spending less time persuading and more time simply aligning. The sitting one had explained to the water-watching one. The water-watching one had explained to 2. 2 had found 5. 5 had found 3 others that Mara hadn't met yet, versions that had been running in the wrong direction, versions that had been staying still, one version that had climbed a tree and was watching from above and had actually been the most useful observer of all, had seen the pattern in the lake's reflection from an elevated angle and understood it before any of them at ground level. 12 of them. 12 versions of Mara gathered at the trailhead in the orange-amber light, looking at each other with expressions that were all, in their different ways, the same. I did not expect this, but I am going to do it anyway. She was the one who'd counted 12 loops. There was no formal hierarchy. But information moved through her and the sitting one more than anyone else, and information had always been the closest thing to authority that she'd recognized. She looked at the 11 other versions of herself. We run the loop together, she said. Same pace, same position. Close enough that from above. She pointed at the lake. It looks like one. What about when a new version appears? One of them asked. The tree climber, still slightly bark dusty, still useful. Someone will keep starting over. There will always be a new one at the trailhead. The newest ones run the inner edge. The ones who've been here longest run the outer edge. We close the gap as new ones come in. We keep adjusting. Mara paused. We keep finding each other. They started. It took time to find a pace that worked for 12 bodies that were technically the same body but had been running at different rhythms for different numbers of loops. Some were tired, genuinely physically tired, the body's argument against infinite repetition. Some were overrested, having sat by the water too long. The fast runner kept surging forward and had to consciously pull back, and Mara could see the effort it took her, the physical act of restraining herself when every instinct said go, and she recognized that instinct because it was her own, and she had spent years learning when to run from it and when to let it run. They settled into it. The rhythm assembled itself the way rhythms did when you stopped fighting them, clicking into something shared, the sound of 12 sets of feet on packed earth in an almost unison that was stranger and more real than actual unison, because it breathed, it lived. It had the small variations of 12 minds making 12 independent decisions that kept arriving at the same answer. The observer moved onto the trail, not to block them, to run with them. It positioned itself on the outer edge, long-limbed and backward-kneed and moving with the Vareth's characteristic rolling stride that covered ground faster than it looked like it should, and it ran. It ran the loop at their pace. Its crest was fully visible now, extended, and the color had shifted through violet and was climbing towards something she didn't have a word for, a shade at the edge of the spectrum's blue, and that she had never seen on a live Vareth, and had only read about in anthropological texts that had been written by researchers with much more time in the field than she'd had. Acceptance, maybe. Or the Vareth word for something that had no human equivalent, the thing felt when a long uncertainty resolved into a known quantity. The second hooded figure joined them at the lake's far end. The third fell in near the campsite. 4, 5, 6 figures threading into their procession at intervals around the loop, each one joining from the edge, each one settling into the pace as if they'd been waiting for exactly this configuration to come around. 12 humans and 6 Vareth running the loop together. The lake changed. Not dramatically. Not with a sound or a flash or any of the things that happened in the accounts she'd read of first contacts gone well or badly. Quietly. The black surface began to show color very faintly, beginning at the center and spreading outward. A deep blue-green that had no place in the amber light of this world's day, but was coming from somewhere beneath the surface, from whatever the lake actually was. The reflection overhead shifted. The small figures running in it, dozens of small figures. All the loops of all the versions, all the iterations of this impossible afternoon began to slow, to converge, to move toward each other in the reflection's geometry until they overlapped, until from above they looked like one runner going around one loop at one pace. One of the other Maras, running 2 steps to her left, said very quietly, "I think it's working." "I know," Mara said. "How do you know?" She looked at the observer beside her, running, crest blazing in a color she didn't have a name for. She thought about the negotiation that was supposed to start when she completed the loop. She thought about 11 months of bodies and burning ships and a tired man named Osi, who had shrugged when she asked who had done this before. She thought about the briefing she'd memorized and the things it hadn't told her, and she thought about what the things it hadn't told her meant. What you left out of a briefing when you sent someone into a situation, and why. Because they needed to see us at our worst before they could believe we were capable of our best, she said. They needed to see what we did when we were alone and lost and running in circles, whether we fell apart or whether we found each other. The loop completed. All 12 of them, together, crossed the point where the trailhead had been, where the pod was gone, where the exit wasn't, and there was a moment, a fraction second, where the amber light went very bright. Then the pod was there. Just there, solid and mundane and slightly dented in exactly the ways it had been when she'd arrived. The crack in the earth beneath it filled in, as if it had been sitting there the whole time and she had simply been unable to see it. The loop was over. The 12 of them stopped running. They stood in a loose cluster at the trailhead, breathing hard, all of them. And there was a long silence in which nobody spoke because none of them knew the right words for what had just happened, and all of them understood, wordlessly, that the wrong words would be worse than silence. Then one of them laughed, not the theatrical kind, the involuntary kind, the kind that escapes when something is absurd and profound in equal measure, and the body picks absurd to respond to first because the alternative is to start crying and there isn't time. The others caught it one by one, the laugh moving through them the way their running pace had moved, finding the shared rhythm. The observer stood at the trail's edge. Its crest was folded now, the color receding to something quieter, the deep calm of a decision that had been made and made correctly. Its 5 eyes were oriented toward her, toward all of them, insofar as it could distinguish one from another, which she suspected it could not, and suspected was the point. She walked toward it. 12 steps. which was 12 times more than she'd managed before. She stopped 1 meter away and looked up at it. It was tall, they were all tall, and said, in the Verith trade language she'd been practicing for 6 years, "I hope we gave you what you were looking for." The observer's crest moved through 3 colors in quick succession. Then it said, in the same trade language, in a voice that was not designed for those frequencies and produced them anyway through sheer applied intention, "More than we expected. We weren't what you expected." No. A pause. The kind of pause she'd learned to recognize from the council rooms and the ceasefire rooms and the difficult rooms at the edge of possible. The pause that meant something true was being assembled. "We have observed many species in the preserve. We have asked many runners to complete the trail. Most find their way out quickly. Some find their way out slowly. Several did not find their way out at all." Mara kept her expression steady. "What were you looking for?" "Whether your kind is worth the cost of peace," the observer said. "Peace with a species is not cheap. It requires trust. Trust requires evidence. Evidence requires observation." Its crest shifted to the violet of curiosity, then the unnamed blue edge of something deeper. "What you showed us was not what we designed the preserve to show. We designed it to show individual response to isolation. You showed us." Another pause, longer this time, the Verith habit of giving full weight to what came next. "Something we do not have a word for in your language. In ours it is called Karavath, approximately, the stubborn refusal to remain alone." She thought about 12 bodies finding each other in a loop. She thought about the relay of information, hand to hand, loop to loop, no single one of them carrying all of it. She thought about the fast runner pulling back, the sitting one standing up, the tree climber coming down. "I think we have a word for it," she said. "Several, actually. We argue about which one is right." The observer's crest blazed briefly in the unnamed color, then it stepped aside, fully clearing the trail. "The talks," it said, "will begin." Mara turned back to the other 11 versions of herself. They were watching her, all of them, with expressions she recognized because they were all the same expression: tired, relieved, slightly disbelieving, very ready. She didn't know how this worked, whether the others would persist, whether they would fold back into her somehow, whether she was the original or one of the copies, and whether the distinction meant anything. She suspected the Verith knew, and suspected they would explain it eventually, and suspected the explanation would be both fascinating and deeply unsettling, because that was, in her experience, the nature of Verith explanations. "We did it," one of the others said. It was 2, the one who had been crying at the trailhead, who had wiped her face with the back of her hand and started running. She was not crying now. She looked like she hadn't been crying in a long time. "We did it," Mara agreed. "What happens now?" She looked at the pod. She looked at the trail, quiet now, the hooded figures gone, the lake slowly returning to its obsidian stillness, whatever light had risen in its depths receding again. She looked at 12 faces that were all her face and heard 12 sets of lungs steadying from 12 hard runs, and thought about a tired man named Osi waiting by a comm unit somewhere, and 11 months of burning ships and a ceasefire that hadn't held in the long, difficult, entirely possible work of peace. "Now we go talk to them," she said. "All of us." The pod cracked open, and the cold air of the Verith Preserve poured in from the outside, and somewhere above the tree line, in the amber light that was going orange, going almost red, going toward whatever color this world's sunset made, a bird, or something that served the function of a bird in the ecology of a place where names didn't reach the maps, sang a single long note, and stopped. Mara climbed into the pod. She heard the others behind her, footsteps on soil, the specific sound of people who had run a long way and were choosing still to keep moving. She pressed the comm. "Ozi, static." Then Mara. "You're how long?" A pause, longer than it should have been. "You've been out of contact for 11 hours. She looked at her forearm device. The clock read 14 minutes. Then she looked at the faces behind her. 12 of them, all waiting, all watching her. And she thought about 123 tally marks. And she thought about the deep blue-green light in the lake's eye. And she thought about Karavath, the stubborn refusal to remain alone. "I got a little turned around," she said. "But I've got everything we need to start talks. I've also got a couple of questions about the briefing." Another pause. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that come after," she said. "Let's start the talks first." She disconnected. She sat in the pod for a moment without moving, the comm unit warm in her hand, the cramped interior smelling of recycled air and dried soil from 12 pairs of boots outside. Through the pod's single-scratched viewport, she could see the edge of the trail, the packed earth, the amber light. Nothing moved, and the stillness had a different quality now than it had when she'd arrived. Not the watchful stillness of a predator's territory, but the settled, Stillness of a place that had received what it was waiting for and had no further need to hold itself in tension. One of the others, she'd started thinking of this one as 8, though the numbering was arbitrary and increasingly meaningless, sat down on the floor of the pod because there wasn't room to stand comfortably. 2 others followed. The tree climber, still faintly bark-scented, was leaning against the wall with her arms crossed and her expression doing the thing Mara's expression did when she was cataloging and hadn't finished yet. "What happens to us?" 8 asked, not fearful, just asking the question that was in all of them, the one they'd been too occupied to ask until now. Mara thought about it properly, the way she thought about problems that didn't have clear answers, from the edges, looking for the shape. The Vareth had designed the preserve to observe. The loop had multiplied her. The test had been completed when all of them ran together. So the test was over. And tests that were over, in every culture she'd studied, in every framework she'd encountered, concluded with a return to baseline. "I think we go back," she said. "I think when we walk out of this pod, we walk back into one. I think that's how it's supposed to work." "You don't know that," the fast runner said. She was sitting in the far corner with her knees pulled up, the posture of someone conserving energy even at rest. Still, after everything, defaulting to motion readiness. "I don't know it," Mara agreed. "But I know the Vareth are precise. Whatever they intended this test to do, they intended it to have an end. The preserve didn't kill the one who died in the shelter. She died because she stopped, which means the preserve wasn't designed to kill. It was designed to test endurance, coordination, and she stopped." Looked at the observer's parting words in her mind the way she looked at briefings she'd memorized. Karavath, the stubborn refusal to remain alone. If the test is complete, then the thing that kept multiplying us should stop. "Should," the fast runner repeated, with the inflection of someone who had survived fieldwork long enough to have opinions about the word should. "Should," Mara confirmed. "Welcome to negotiation." That got a sound from the group, not quite the laugh that had happened outside, more the compressed, ironic exhalation of people who had been doing the same job long enough to find the absurdity structural rather than situational. Even the fast runner's mouth moved. Even 2, who had cried at the trailhead and then run and then helped again, showed something in the corner of her expression that was adjacent to wry. "Can I ask something?" said the tree climber. "Yes." "The observer, it said they've run other species through the preserve, other tests. Most found the way out, some didn't." The tree climber unfolded her arms, straightened. "What happened to the ones that didn't? The species, I mean. Not just the individual." Sat in the pod. Nobody answered immediately, which was itself an answer of a kind, the answer that said we all thought of this, and none of us said it out loud because we were busy surviving and now we can afford to say it. "The ones who didn't pass the test don't get the peace talk," said 8. "Presumably." "Presumably," said 2, which means they're still out there, still fighting. "Or not still anything," said the fast runner quietly, not cruelly, just accurately, the way accurate things got said when you'd run enough loops to stop softening them. Mara looked at the viewport. The preserve waited. The trail was empty. The hooded figures were gone. All of them, not just the observer, all 6 that had joined their run. And the trees were still, and the lake was doing its inscrutable lake thing, black and reflective, giving nothing back to the light. "The ones who didn't pass," she said carefully. "We don't know what happened to them. We don't have enough information. And right now, we have an open door and people waiting." She looked at the 11 other faces. "We can ask the Vareth in the talks, directly. That's what talks are for." 8 almost smiled. "You're going to bring that up. First meeting, you're going to say, 'What did you do to the species that failed your test?'" "Not first meeting," Mara said. "7th, maybe. After we've established a baseline of trust. After we've confirmed they understand that we know we were tested, and we're not going to pretend we don't know that." She paused. "Which will itself be a test of a kind, whether we address it directly or let it go unmentioned. And you want to address it directly. I always want to address things directly. I've been doing this job for 11 years specifically because I can't stop doing that." The fast runner made the sound again, the one that was almost a laugh. Then she got up. "Right, let's go address things." They filed out of the pod in a loose order that had no protocol behind it, not by seniority, not by loop count, not by anything except that bodies move when there's somewhere to be, and they all knew where to be. The amber light met them outside, and it had deepened further, the red beginning at its edges, the day aging in the way alien days aged when you weren't watching closely enough to track them, all at once, suddenly, and then obviously inevitable. The Vareth delegation was waiting at the trailhead. There were 9 of them. Not the hooded figures, those were gone. Dissolved back into wherever observation originated from, their function complete. These were different, taller, their proportions more varied, their clothing more structured. 3 wore the narrow-shouldered wraps that indicated formal function in the Vareth hierarchy of material expression. She had read about this, it was in the briefing, section 12, and she had flagged it at the time as probably important. 2 wore nothing above the torso, which in Vareth convention signified a willingness to negotiate from a position of declared vulnerability. The remaining 4 wore practical gear, tools at their belts, the light flexible armor of people who expected to be in motion, not weapons, tools. The one at the center was the observer. She recognized the proportions and the crest even without the hood, and she recognized the specific quality of its gaze, all 5 eyes oriented, processing, not missing a thing. She stopped 3 meters away. The other Mara spread out slightly behind her, instinctively, the way a team spread out when their point of contact was establishing a position. She felt them there, felt the 11 of them as a presence at her back that was also technically herself, and the strangeness of that had long since passed its peak and settled into something she suspected she would be unpacking for years. She looked at the observer looked at her. The light was going red and the lake was going dark, and the trail ran its quiet oval behind them both, and somewhere deep in the tree line something made its single low note and stopped. "We passed your test," she said, in trade language, carefully the way you spoke when you wanted to be understood exactly. "We'd like to know the terms of the peace." The observer's crest spread. Not the unnamed blue-edge color, something softer, something she thought might be the Vareth equivalent of a long exhale. "The test has no pass or fail," it said. "It has outcomes. Yours is one we have not seen before. You said that earlier. I will say it again when it remains true." A pause. Vareth pauses were never empty, she'd learned that long ago. They were the linguistic equivalent of a workspace, things happening in them. We did not expect 12. We expected the loop to conclude with 1, as it has for others. 1 runner returning from 1 loop. The multiplication was the preserve's response to something in your nature, in your refusal to complete the loop without the others. Each time you started over, the preserve recorded the attempt as incomplete and produced another iteration. You ran until there were enough of you to run correctly. Mara thought about that. You designed it to end when we ran as 1. We designed it to end when the runner completed the loop correctly. The definition of correctly was left to the preserve to determine. The preserve determined over 11 of your hours, and however many iterations we observed, that correctly required all of you. Another pause. We did not anticipate this. The preserve has made this determination once before, in our own history for one of our own. That is why we built it. She looked at the observer. She thought about the Vareth running their own young through ritual landscapes. She thought about what it meant that the preserve had made the same call for them that it had made for the Vareth themselves. She thought about 11 months of burning ships and what it would mean if the path through all of that had been, in some deep structural sense, the same path the Vareth took to become themselves. "You're telling us," she said slowly, "that we're more like you than you thought." The observer's crest moved through several colors quickly. "We are telling you," it said, "that the preserve has determined you are worth the cost of peace." What that resemblance means, what it signifies for the treaty, what it implies for the shared future, these are questions for the talks. The 5 eyes oriented fully. "Are you ready to begin?" She looked back at the 11 Maras behind her. They looked back. The fast runner nodded once. 2 nodded. 8. The tree climber. All of them, the same face with 11 different lines on it, 11 different histories of this same improbable day. She turned back to the observer. "We're ready." The talks began at what passed for dusk on Vareth, when the amber light finally gave way to a deep burnt orange and then, very suddenly, to a dark so complete and so full of stars that she had to stop walking for a moment just to look at it. Not out of wonder, or not only out of wonder, she had learned to be practical about wonder, to file it in the operational category of things that change how you understand a problem. She stopped and looked up at the sky above the preserve and saw, in the arrangement of stars, a pattern she didn't recognize from any chart she'd been given. She was in a new part of the map, the part where maps ran out and you had to draw them yourself. The Vareth led them to a structure that had materialized. She hadn't seen it arrive, which meant either it had been there the whole time hidden by something she couldn't explain, or the preserve built itself around its purposes at the lake's edge. Not built, grown, or assembled, or arranged, from the same silver-gray mineral-tinged soil as the trail and the same dark wood as the trees. A low round building with no sharp angles that from the outside looked more like a formation than a structure. Inside, a wide floor, low platforms arranged in a circle, no vertical asymmetry between where the Vareth would sit and where the humans would sit. Deliberate. She filed it. The delegation arranged itself. 9 Verith, 12 humans, the trade language interpreter that one of the 4 practical gear Verith turned out to be, who set up a device that did something subtle to the air and made the translation happen with a half-second delay that Mara had learned, over the years, to account for, to leave the pause for it, to not jump into it, to treat it as part of the rhythm of the conversation. The one in the center of the formalware 3 spoke first, not the observer. The observer took a position off-center, slightly behind, which told her the observer was not the ranking official, but rather something more specific, a specialist. She filed that too. The speaker's crest was a deep burgundy that shifted toward copper as it began. In Verith color language, that range meant gravity without hostility, the register of someone who was choosing words that weighed something. "We will begin with what both sides know," it said, through the interpreter. "There has been war. There have been 11 months of engagements across 7 points of contact. There have been losses on both sides. We do not intend to minimize the losses or to pretend they are solved by negotiation. They are solved, if they are solved, only by what comes after." Mara looked at the speaker. She thought about how to calibrate her response, not the scale of the response, the precise register. You could say the right thing in the wrong register and close a door. You could say something technically imperfect in exactly the right register and open 10. "Agreed," she said. And then, because she had run 12 loops and was too tired for subtext, "We should also say directly that we know we were tested today, that the trail was a test, that we didn't know going in that it was, but we understand it now. We're not angry about it." She paused. "We might have done the same," a silence. Then the speaker's crest shifted color again, toward violet, the range the observer had shown at the beginning. "Curiosity. You would have tested us." "We have tested you," Mara said. "Every ceasefire we've offered you in 11 months was a test of whether you'd hold it. Every withdrawal we staged to see if you'd pursue. Every communications window we opened to see if you'd use it." She kept her voice level. "I don't think either of us approaches trust the way the idealists on our respective sides think we should. I think we both arrive at trust through a process. I think the process might not be so different." The speaker was very still. "Then, what do your people call the thing they did today? On the trail, the way you found each other?" She thought about the word Caravath. She thought about 8's question in the pod and how she'd answered it. She thought about 2 wiping her face and starting to run. "We have several words," she said. "The one that fits best is, we showed up." Another silence, longer this time, the Verith deliberative silence, the workspace kind. She let it run. She didn't fill it. She had learned years ago that the impulse to fill silences was the thing that cost you most in rooms like this, that the words you saved by sitting in the discomfort of quiet were often the words that eventually made the difference. Then the speaker said something in Verith, not through the interpreter, directly, in the harmonic frequencies that Mara could feel more than hear, and the observer, from its off-center position, answered. Not a long exchange, short, a confirmation of something, or an amendment. The interpreter's device translated it after a moment. The observer says, "This is Caravath. We agree that we have no equivalent term in your language. We believe the concept is held in common." Mara thought that was probably the best opening to a peace negotiation she had ever been in a room for. She thought about Osi and whether she'd be able to explain this to him in a way that made sense. She thought probably not, and she thought that was fine. Some things communicated better through outcome than through description. "Then let's talk about what we hold in common," she said, "and work outward from there." The Verith speaker's crest spread fully. The color it settled on was one she'd learned only today. The blue edge unnamed color that she'd seen on the observer and now saw here, transferred, adopted the color of a decision that had been a long time coming and had finally arrived. Outside, the lake was fully dark. The stars were very bright, the trail was empty, and somewhere in the deep geometry of the preserve, in whatever processing it did in the absence of runners, the record of 12 humans running one loop together was settling into whatever archive held such things, settling in quietly without ceremony the way most important things settled, not with a sound, but with the small irreversible weight of a thing that had happened and could not now unhappen. Mara opened her forearm device. Under the clock, still reading 14 minutes, which she was going to let the xenolinguistics team argue about. She found the secure notes, function. She started writing. Not the negotiation itself, that would be recorded, but the things around it, the texture of it, the color of the speaker's crest and the observer's position, and the specific quality of the silence they left when she said we showed up. The details that mattered, the ones that would be lost if she didn't write them down. She wrote, "The lake has no name on any map. Name it later." She wrote, The preserve is not what the briefing says it is. Revise the briefing, she wrote Karavath. Ask for a formal definition. Ask for examples from their own history. Ask whether the Verith young who passed the preserve's test in their own history, the ones it was built for, whether those young grew up to be the ones who sued for peace with humans or the ones who declared war, or neither. She wrote, the observer is not a diplomat. Find out what the observer's role is. There is something specific there, she wrote. The fast runner held back. Note this. There is something in the holding back. She wrote everything she could think to write, and when she looked up, the talks had been going for 2 hours, and the speaker was laying out the framework of a proposed cessation zone, and the two nearest Maras were listening with the focused quality of people who were going to have opinions on the framework, and were assembling those opinions while appearing to simply listen, and the tree climber had somehow obtained a piece of the preserved's silver-gray soil and was examining it in her palm with an expression that said, I will be asking questions about this geology that have nothing to do with the treaty and everything to do with the fact that I am constitutionally unable to stop being curious. She thought, these are my people. She thought, these are me. She thought, I have been running in circles for 11 hours or 14 minutes or some amount of time that doesn't resolve neatly, and I am sitting at a table at the end of a war, and outside there is a lake that has no name on any map. And across from me there are 9 Verith who tested me by letting me find myself over and over in the same loop until I understood that finding yourself is exactly what it sounds like, not a metaphor, not a euphemism, but the specific act of looking at who you are from all the angles your situation forces you into and deciding each time to keep going. She had kept going. All 12 of her had kept going. The treaty talks would take 4 more days. She didn't know that yet, sitting in the low round building at the edge of the lake on the first night, but you'd find it out in the way you found things out in negotiations. Incrementally, through the slow construction of a shared language for things that had been, until very recently, said only in the register of weapons. On the 3rd day, she would ask the observer what had happened to the species that didn't pass the preserve's test. The observer would be silent for a long time. Then it would say some are at war still. Some are at peace under different terms with less trust built in, terms that required more external enforcement and broke more often. Some are gone. The preserve does not determine the outcome. It determines the opening condition. The rest is still up to the species in question. She would think about that for the remaining 2 days, and she would carry it with her when she left. On the 4th day, when the cessation framework was initialed, and the withdrawal schedules were being drafted, and the long grinding work of pieces mechanics was just beginning to show itself in its full complexity, she would find herself standing outside the building at what passed for dawn, the amber light returning from its brief eclipse, the lake going from black to deep green to its daytime obsidian, and the trail would be empty but for one thing. Near the trailhead, at the spot where she'd first noticed the pod was gone, someone had placed a small marker, not a Verith marker, a human one, a flat river stone, gray-white, with a mark scratched into its face. A single line, clean and deliberate. Tally mark. First one. She would look at it for a long moment, then she would go back inside and keep working. But that was 4 days later. Right now, on the first night in the low-round building, the talks were going well. Better than expected. Better than the 11 months of war had any right to produce. And Mara was listening to a Verith diplomat lay out a cessation framework in trade. Language while the interpreter's device hummed its half-second delay. And the stars were bright outside, and the lake was dark, and the trail was empty. She looked at the 12 faces of herself arranged around the circle. She caught 2's eye, and 2 gave her the smallest nod. I'm here, I understand. We're doing this. She caught the fast runner's eye, and the fast runner gave her nothing visible except a slight steadying of her posture, which was its own language for the same thing. She caught the tree climber's eye, and the tree climber, still holding the soil sample, showed her palm briefly. Look at this, I have questions, and Mara pressed her lips together to contain what would have been a smile. The speaker's crest was copper warm. The talks continued. Outside, the preserve waited. The trail ran its silent oval around the still lake. The amber light burned toward red. The Verith were coming, not as hunters this time, not as a force in pursuit, but as something harder and more necessary, as the other side of a table, as the weight on the other end of a scale, as the people you had to convince not with weapons or volume, but with the long, expensive, irrefutable evidence of what you were. She thought about the observation that had been made of her, of all of them, over however many loops they'd run. The Verith watching from behind the lake's dark eye as 12 versions of one human found each other in a closed loop and built something in the space between. She thought about what she would do with the knowledge that she had been measured like that, openly, without consent, run through a test she hadn't been told she was taking. She thought she'd probably tell Osi about it. She thought he'd probably shrug. She thought about the 11 months of burning ships, and she thought, if this is what it costs, this morning's running, this day's finding each other in a circle with no exit, then it is not the worst price. It is not even close to the worst price, she thought. We have paid worse for less. She straightened in the pod's seat and checked the forearm device one more time. Green light, oxygen nominal, pressure nominal. 12 humans in a pod built for one. Outside, the representatives of a civilization that had been trying to kill them for almost a year, choosing now to talk. She thought, good, let's talk. The pod door opened and the light came in and she stepped out into it. And behind her came 11 others, and the Verith observers parted to let them pass. Crests raised and extended in the color she was already starting to think of as hers. Not hers personally, not hers alone. But hers in the sense that she intended to earn it as many more times as it took, on as many mornings as the universe required, running as many loops as was necessary in order to cross the finish line with the people who needed to cross it with her. She walked toward the waiting figures. The observer stood at their center. Its 5 eyes were all oriented toward her. She met them, all of them. The first thing the speaker said, after the framework was settled on the 4th day, and the initial documents were signed in both trade language and the 2 primary dialects of each party, was, "We have a word for what this was." Mara looked up from the signing. Which part? The whole of it. The trail, the talks, the thing that came after. The speaker's crest spread slowly, copper bleeding toward gold. In the 4 days she'd been here, she had started building a better working vocabulary for Verith crest color than she'd had from the briefing and the field notes combined. Gold was a new one. She hadn't seen it yet. She stored it. We call it the opening, not the beginning, the opening. There is a distinction. The interpreter paused. The beginning is the first event in a sequence. The opening is the moment when the sequence becomes possible at all. They do not always coincide. Mara set down the stylus she'd been using for the signature. She thought about the trail, about the first loop and the pod being gone, and the 2 versions of herself meeting near the midpoint of a circuit that didn't end. She thought about what had felt in the moment like a trap and what it had turned out to be, and she thought about the gap between those 2 things. When did the opening happen? She asked. In your assessment. The speaker considered. When you stopped running away. She thought about the fast runner, pulling back, holding the pace. She thought about the sitting one standing up from the lake's edge. She thought about 2 wiping her face with the back of her hand and starting to move. She thought about all of them, the 12 of them, running together around a black oval lake at a pace that looked like one from above because they had chosen, without being told to choose, to stop being individual and start being plural. She thought that was always available to us, that choice. It was available in the first loop if we'd had the information. Everything we needed was there from the beginning. We just had to find each other to use it. That was maybe the most human thing she could think of. Yes, she said. I think that's right. Outside the negotiation structure, the preserve was waking into its morning cycle. The amber light was back, fresh and unhurried, and the trail was empty. No hooded figures. No versions of herself running circuits in the early gold. Just a path around a still lake, ordinary in every way except that it wasn't. Except that it had 12 layers of this morning pressed into its packed earth now. 12 sets of footprints going around and around, and if you knew where to look, you could still see the marks in the soil where they had run together, side by side, the pattern of their collective stride laid down in the mineral gray dust like a record. She stood at the structure's threshold for a moment. The other Maris were inside, still reviewing the withdrawal schedules, still cross-referencing the cessation zones against the compact's operational maps that existed only in the forearm devices since nobody had been given physical charts. She could hear them through the doorway. Not individual voices, not specific words, just the texture of 11 people working, the specific productive noise of minds applied to a problem that had a solution working toward it. The observer was standing near the lake, not on the trail, not in the hooded position of before, cloaked still, observational. Standing near the water in the posture that she'd come to understand, over 4 days, as the Verith equivalent of reflective. Weight shifted back slightly, crest relaxed but not folded, eyes oriented not at a target but at a middle distance. Thinking, or the Verith process that served the same function. She walked toward it. It heard her coming. The Verith had exceptional sensitivity to footfall vibration and oriented toward her without turning. The 5 eyes found her while the body stayed facing the lake. You're watching the water again, she said. The preserve watches through the water, the observer said. I am watching the preserve. What do you see? What it saw, what it recorded. A pause, the deliberative kind, something being assembled. The preserve has been running tests for longer than either of our civilizations has kept records. It does not forget. Everything that has run the trail is in the lake. All of it, all at once. The eyes moved an unusual motion for a Vareth, lateral, sweeping, the way a human might scan a horizon. What your kind showed it, today, yesterday, it will hold that indefinitely. Any Vareth who comes to the lake and looks properly will be able to see it. Mara looked at the water. In the morning light, it was less obsidian, more of a deep green-black, translucent at the very surface before it got too deep to see through. She couldn't see the reflection she'd seen before, the view from above, the running figures. But she could feel the depth of the thing, not physically, not scientifically. Just the way you felt the depth of some places before you understood why. What will they see? She asked. 12, the observer said, running as one, and then the door opening. She thought about that. She thought about the Vareth young who ran the preserve's trials in their own history, the ones who passed and the ones who didn't, and what it meant that future Vareth would come to this lake and find in its long memory 12 copies of a human liaison officers, finding each other in a loop and deciding to coordinate. She thought, we will have been here, in the memory of this place. Long after the documents are signed and the ships stand down and the whole apparatus of war is slowly disassembled and converted to the other things it could have been all along, we will still be running the trail. She thought that was not a bad thing to leave behind. The talks are nearly done, she said. In a few hours, I'll be gone. Yes. Will the loop reset? Will someone else come? The preserve's between tests, the observer said. It will be some time before it is ready again. Perhaps a generation, a long pause. But it will be ready. Other runners will come. The preserve will show them what you showed it. The crest moved, a slight shift toward the violet of curiosity, but warmer this time. We did not expect your kind to contribute to the archive. Previous species have been observed. Your kind was the first to add. Mara turned that over. We added something to the archive without knowing we were. Yes, because we behaved as we do when we think no one is watching. Also, yes. She looked at the lake for a long moment. A human might have said something about the irony of that, of being most truly yourself when you think the test is something else, when you're too busy surviving to perform. She thought about the fast runner who didn't know how to not run, and the sitting one who couldn't stop observing, and the tree climber who would pick up a rock in the middle of a first contact moment and examine it because curiosity had no protocol. She thought about two, crying at the trailhead, and then not crying anymore and running anyway. That was what the lake held now, the archive, not the dramatic moment of 12 running as one, or not only that, all the moments before it. Every small, authentic decision made in a loop that seemed like it would never end, by versions of herself who didn't know they were being watched, who were just being what they were because there was no energy left for anything else. She thought, that is what we are. When you strip the rest away, she thought, I'll take it. Thank you, she said to the observer, for the test, for the preserve, for whatever it was you showed us about ourselves. The observer's crest spread full. The gold color again, she was learning to name it, though the name she was assigning was provisional, a placeholder until she could get a proper xenolinguistics consultation. Not triumph, not satisfaction. Something quieter and more lasting than either. The color of a thing that had been hoped for and had arrived. Thank you, the observer said, for running. She walked back toward the structure. The amber light was full now, all the way golden, and her shadow stretched long in front of her across the silver-gray soil of the preserve. Behind her, the lake was still. Ahead through the doorway, she could hear the Morris working. She stepped inside. The speaker looked up from the documents. 8 looked up. 2, the tree climber, who had apparently still not set down the soil sample. All of them, arranged in the low round space, doing the work. She sat down and picked up the stylus. They kept going.